It was too early to call it night, but the man was already shutting things down. Ray Tilden, 39, lean and quiet, was sweeping the floor of his woodshop with a worn-out broom. Not because it needed it, he'd already swept twice today, but because he didn't like the sound of silence. The soft scratch of bristles on oak gave the room rhythm. Comfort. Something to do with his hands. The space smelled like cedar and linseed oil. A small clock on the workbench ticked faintly, the only working one in the room. On the far wall above the door hung another clock, larger, older, its hands frozen at 2:17. He hadn't tried to fix it, not once in 4 years. He passed by a stool tucked beside the bench. One of the legs was uneven, but he never sanded it flat. That was the seat she always chose. Ray reached up and adjusted the lamp hanging from the rafter. The light wasn't flickering, but he touched it anyway. Just something he did. He moved to the corner where a pile of old wood was stacked. Each piece had a label: oak, 3 feet, maple, cracked, birch, possible, organized but never used. Like a lumber graveyard waiting to be forgiven. Outside, the sun was low. Light leaked through the slats in gold streaks. Ray crossed the room, opened the drawer beneath the workbench, and took out a matchbox. He struck one match, then another. The first had snapped. The second held. He lit the small glass lamp by the window. Same one every night. It gave off just enough glow to reach the edge of the workroom, but never filled it. He stood there for a while, watching dust float through the light. Then he blew the match out, turned, and walked to the door. He paused before leaving. As always, he touched the old wall clock with the back of his fingers. Not to fix it, not to test it, just to remind it he was still here. Crossing the yard, he glanced up at the willow that leaned over the shed. One branch had cracked in last winter's storm, but hadn't fallen. It just hung there, half broken, still attached. He liked that about it. The porch light came on with a soft click as he stepped onto the boards. Inside the house, everything was as it always was. One plate on the drying rack, one mug on the shelf, a folded blanket on the arm of the couch untouched. He boiled water out of habit and poured 2 mugs of tea. Only one got sugar. He took them both into the front room, placed one on the coffee table, the other on the windowsill beside a faded photograph of a young woman holding a toolbox in one hand and a baby bird in the other. He didn't speak to the photo, just sat. Sometimes he drank the tea, sometimes he didn't. Tonight he didn't. He leaned back in the chair that squeaked only once on purpose, so he'd know if someone else ever sat there. He let the room get quiet, real quiet, the kind that presses in from the outside. Then a sound he wasn't expecting. Not thunder, not a coyote, an engine. Weak, struggling, coming up the gravel path from the old state road. His brow furrowed, but he didn't move. Waited. Headlights blinked behind the trees, then cut out. No doors slammed, just silence. Ray set his cup down and rose. Stepped out onto the porch and looked toward the edge of the woods. A pickup truck, rusted red, parked half off the road. The driver's side door was open, and a figure, slim, backlit, still stood beside it. He couldn't see her face, but something in the way she stood told him she wasn't lost, just unsure. In the cab, movement, 2 small shapes, kids. Ray didn't speak. He stepped off the porch slowly, careful not to alarm. No flashlight, no raised voice, just his presence. The woman didn't run, but she didn't move either. Ray stopped at the edge of the clearing and said the first true thing that came to mind. "I'm not the kind who asks questions," he said, voice steady. "But there's a dry shed and I keep the kettle on." She said nothing. But as he turned to walk back toward the house, he heard something small. A soft creak, a door easing closed, and then 2 light footsteps in the gravel. Following. They didn't come to the house. Ray knew they wouldn't. He'd lived too long out here not to recognize the instincts of someone who'd been hunted, human or otherwise. Instead, the woman led her children around the edge of the yard, toward the old utility shed that sat near the tree line. He had left it unlocked since the day he built it. Not because he thought someone might need it, just because he didn't see the point in locking empty space. She checked inside first, alone. Her shadow moved along the walls as the kids waited outside. When she re-emerged, she gave a small nod, barely noticeable. The younger one clung to her hip. The older girl, maybe 10, walked quietly behind, dragging a threadbare duffel. From his front window, Ray didn't stare. He just stood with the curtain folded slightly in one hand, watching. The way the woman moved reminded him of deer in winter, always alert even when still. Her eyes scanned everything before stepping forward as if the earth might shift beneath her feet. She didn't look toward the house once. Ray set down the curtain and walked to the stove. He pulled down a clean blanket from the pantry, folded it tight. Added 2 apples, a pocket flashlight, and a small can of peaches to a canvas bag. On top, he placed a folded card with just one word written in pencil. Welcome. He left the bag on the back porch, didn't knock, just placed it there and went inside. An hour later, he checked again. The bag was gone. Out in the shed, a dim light glowed. He didn't remember leaving a lamp out there, but maybe he had. Or maybe she'd found her own way. Either way, she hadn't run. He turned off the lights in the house one by one, but he kept the porch light on. That night, he didn't sleep much, not because he was worried. Something else. Something he couldn't quite name. The next morning brought a thin mist and cold air that crept through his sleeves. Ray carried firewood to the shop, careful not to clatter it. Smoke already curled from the chimney of the house. But he hadn't seen movement from the shed until he did. The door opened slowly and the girl came out first. Skinny legs, oversized sweater, hair a little tangled. She stood there for a second, blinking against the brightness. Then she turned and whispered something inside. A moment later, the woman stepped out. She didn't carry herself like someone asking permission, more like someone exhausted from granting it. Ray kept walking, not toward them but toward the shop, giving them space to move on their own terms. "Morning," he said quietly as he passed within earshot. The girl gave the faintest nod. The woman said nothing. That was fine. He pushed the shop door open and disappeared inside. A while later, he heard the crunch of soft steps on gravel. He didn't turn, just kept sanding the edge of a cedar drawer he'd started last week. Then a shadow appeared in the doorway. It was the girl. Alone. She didn't speak. Just looked around the shop like she'd stepped into a different world. Her eyes paused on a half-finished chair, on a wall of hand tools arranged like a map, on the old wall clock that hadn't ticked in years. Ray set down the sander, wiped his hands. He didn't ask what she wanted. Instead, he picked up a block of pine, tapped it twice, then reached for a small hammer. He held both out to her. She hesitated, then took them. They stood there, no words exchanged. The girl watched him set a nail against the wood. He gestured for her to try the same. Her first swing was too hard. The nail bent. She looked up, expecting a reaction. Ray didn't flinch. He just turned the block over and pointed again. Second try was gentler. Still not perfect, but better. He smiled once, barely more than a twitch at the edge of his mouth. The girl's shoulders dropped slightly. Maybe from relief, maybe something else. Behind her, the woman stood in the shed doorway, arms folded, watching everything, not stepping forward, not stepping away. For now, that was enough. That afternoon, the shop smelled like fresh-cut pine. Ray was working on a drawer face, running his fingers along the grain, checking for splinters. Outside, the light had gone gold and low. He wasn't watching the shed, not exactly, but every time he stepped to the window, his eyes passed over it. No movement, no sound. A part of him expected the truck to be gone by now. People like that, they didn't stay long. They weren't used to staying. But it was still there. Same position, same silence. He poured water into the kettle. Not for tea this time, for bread. Ray wasn't a cook by any stretch, but his hands knew how to measure, how to knead. The dough was simple flour, salt, water, thyme. Nothing extra like him. As the bread rose near the warmth of the stovepipe, he stepped outside. Walked the yard slowly, checking the line of trees, the gutters, a broken post near the old gate. All routine, but not pointless. By late afternoon, the bread was out of the oven. One loaf, dense, a little misshapen, but good. He wrapped it in clean cloth and placed it in a small paper sack next to a glass bottle filled with dark tea. Then he added something he hadn't planned. A small tin of honey. It had been sitting in his cupboard for months. He wasn't even sure where it came from. No note, no explanation. Just those three things. He placed the bag at the edge of the gravel path, halfway between the shed and the trees. Not close enough to startle, not so far it would feel dismissive. Then he walked back to the shop. From inside, he didn't look out the window. He kept working, planing, sanding, adjusting a drawer slide. But he didn't leave the room either. A soft knock broke the stillness, not at the door, on wood. He turned. The girl stood in the doorway again, not stepping in this time, just holding the sack in both hands. Her eyes met his, questioning without accusation. Ray nodded once. A quiet gesture, yes. It was meant for you. She looked down at the sack, then back up, still silent. Behind her, the woman had moved closer, just enough that he could see her now, arms still crossed, eyes darker than the dusk around her. Ray didn't wave, didn't call out. He simply took one step forward, picked up a cloth from the bench and handed it to the girl. "Warm bread sweats," he said, his voice even. "Wrap it loose or it'll turn soft." The girl nodded once, then turned and walked back, as they disappeared into the fading light. Ray stood there, one hand on the door frame, not because he needed to, because he didn't want to close it too fast. That evening, as night settled over the valley, the porch light flicked on again. Ray sat in the same chair as before, 2 mugs, one for him, one untouched. But this time he placed the second cup not on the table but on the windowsill, facing out. He didn't say anything, but somewhere in the shed a faint glow shimmered. Not just firelight movement, a shape against the canvas window, a shoulder, a hand. Someone was sitting still, watching back, not in fear, in silence, like maybe for the first time in a long time being seen didn't feel like danger. Ray didn't smile, didn't shift, but he lifted his mug slightly, not a toast, just a signal. From the darkness nothing moved, but the porch light stayed on, and the door, for once, was left slightly ajar. The shed smelled like old wood and motor oil. It had once been a place for tools, maybe a bicycle or two. Now it held something much more fragile. A woman, 2 children, and the kind of silence that wraps around people who don't yet feel safe. The floor was bare except for a few wool blankets folded neatly on crates. There was no lock on the door, no bolt on the window. And yet she checked them twice, not because she was afraid of him. She didn't know him well enough for that. She was afraid of what might come looking. The boy, 6, maybe 7, had curled into her side. The girl lay on the far end, eyes open, staring at the dark ceiling. They hadn't asked where they were. They hadn't asked if they were staying. They just followed. The woman leaned her head against the wooden wall and let out a breath so quiet even she couldn't hear it. Outside, the night deepened. Cold crept in through the cracks. She pulled the blanket tighter around the boy, her fingers trembling. Not from temperature, from holding too much together for too long. Then light, soft, steady, warm. She turned and saw it through the window. A glass lamp, freshly lit, placed carefully on an old crate just outside the shed door. No knock, no footsteps, just light. She hesitated, then stood, opened the door slowly and looked around. The yard was empty. The house was dark except for one room where a single window glowed with low amber. The man was sitting inside, back turned to her, a book in his lap or maybe just his hands folded. He didn't glance her way, didn't wave. She stepped out, picked up the lamp and brought it inside. The flame flickered once, then steadied. She set it down on the crate beside her and sat cross-legged on the floor, facing it like a campfire. The boy stirred in his sleep. The girl shifted, finally blinking slower. No one spoke, but for the first time in days, they stopped listening for danger. Ray didn't sleep either. He never did when there were people on the land. It wasn't about fear. It was about awareness. Some part of him stayed alert even when his body rested. Around 2 in the morning, he got up, walked barefoot to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. Out the back window, the lamp was still glowing inside the shed. He didn't need to get closer to see it. He knew the look of that kind of flame. It hadn't been turned low, it hadn't been snuffed out. It had been trusted to burn. He stood there a moment, hand resting on the window frame. His palm still had the scent of cedar from the drawer he'd finished earlier. Then he turned and walked back to bed. At sunrise, the frost hadn't yet lifted from the grass. The children emerged first. The girl helped her brother tie his shoes, not neatly but carefully. Then she led him across the yard past the willow tree and stopped halfway to the house. Ray saw them from the shop window. He didn't move, just kept sanding the corner of a cabinet. They waited, not expecting anything, not even hoping really, just waiting. When the woman came out moments later, her steps were slower, measured. She carried the lamp in both hands like something borrowed. Ray opened the shop door before they reached it. She didn't speak, just extended the lamp. He took it without a word, placed it back on the shelf beside his chisels. They stood there, 2 people not yet strangers, but not quite anything else. Then she said quietly, "Thank you." Ray nodded, not dismissively, not awkwardly, just enough. Then he said the only thing that felt necessary. "There's always coffee around 7. She didn't answer, but she didn't walk away either. And in the morning light, her shoulders so often drawn up and ready sat just a little lower. A little less like armor. A little more like someone remembering how to stand without flinching. The girl came back alone. It was sometime after 9. Ray had just finished oiling a set of drawer pulls, the scent of walnut and beeswax lingering in the air. He heard the door creak, not the front one, but the side, the one that stuck if you didn't lift and pull at the same time. She'd figured it out on the first try. She stepped into the shop like someone entering a library, quiet, watching, careful not to touch anything. Her hands were buried deep in the sleeves of a faded hoodie, one that hung past her waist like it used to belong to someone else. Ray didn't look up right away. He wiped his hands, set the cloth down, and motioned toward the workbench without speaking. She moved closer, inch by inch, until she stood beside the stool, then waited. On the bench was a piece of pine clean rectangular with a single mark drawn in pencil across one edge. Ray pointed to it, then to the small hammer resting nearby. "Try," he said. Just one word, not commanding, not testing, just offering. The girl looked at him, eyes narrowing slightly like she was trying to solve a puzzle with no instructions. Then she reached for the hammer. It was lighter than it looked. She held it wrong at first, too far up the handle, but Ray didn't correct her. He just placed a short nail beside the pencil line and stood back. Her first swing missed. Not by much, but enough to leave a scratch in the wood. She froze, like waiting for punishment. The kind that didn't always come loud. Sometimes it came slow, with a look, with silence that lasted too long. Ray didn't move, didn't say anything. Instead, he picked up another nail, set it gently beside the first, then slid the block of wood across the bench toward her again. Second swing connected. The nail sank slightly, tilted but held. She exhaled sharply, like someone had been holding their breath without noticing. He nodded once. Still silent. Then reached under the bench and pulled out a sanding block, held it up, waited. She took it without a word. Together they worked. Not fast, not with urgency, just steady. She sanded edges while he fit a joint. When she missed a spot, he pointed once with the flat of his finger. When she caught it on the second pass, he tapped the bench once, approving. It wasn't teaching. It was something older, something simpler. In the quiet, Ray watched her start to relax, her shoulders often braced like doors against a storm, slowly eased downward. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind one ear. Her hands found rhythm in the grain of the wood. No praise was given, none was needed. Outside, the wind picked up slightly. Leaves scratched against the tin roof. But inside, the air stayed warm. Then the voice came, soft, from the doorway. "She's not bothering you, is she?" It was the woman, her mother, leaning against the doorframe. One arm folded, the other holding a coffee mug Ray recognized as his own. She didn't look like she meant to interrupt, just checking. Ray shook his head. "She's got good aim," he said. The girl looked down, trying to hide the ghost of a smile. Not a grin, just a curve, almost too shy to form. Her mother watched for a second longer, then nodded once and stepped back into the light. When the girl turned back to the bench, Ray slid a fresh piece of wood toward her. "Want to try something harder?" he asked. She didn't answer, but she picked up the hammer again. And that was enough. By the time the noon sun warmed the roof, the girl had 3 finished pieces on the bench, rough, uneven, but hers. She brushed off sawdust like she was brushing off part of a different life. Before she left, she paused at the door, looked back once. Ray nodded. "Same time tomorrow." She hesitated, then nodded in return. When the door closed behind her, the shop felt quieter than before, but not empty. On the bench, one of her bent nails lay beside her last piece. Ray didn't throw it away. He placed it in the small jar by the window labeled "Almost," then lit the lamp beside it, same as always, but this time it felt just a little brighter. The first thing Ray noticed was the silence. Not the usual kind, the comfortable kind, with birdsong and rustling trees and the occasional hum of tools. This was the kind of silence that pressed in. Tight. Still. Too still. He stepped out onto the porch, a steaming mug in hand, and glanced toward the shed. No one. Not the girl, not the woman. No sound of footsteps. Then he saw the door. It was open a crack. That wasn't like them. Ray set the mug down without drinking and crossed the yard. He didn't knock, just stood in the doorway for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the dimness. The girl sat curled near the back wall, eyes wide but quiet. Her mother knelt on a blanket beside the boy. He was wrapped in 2 layers, but his face was pale and slick with sweat. His chest rose too fast. She looked up, startled, then quickly shielded the boy from view, not angry, just instinct. Ray didn't speak, didn't move. Her voice came sharp, low. "He just needs rest." Ray nodded once, not arguing, but he stayed. "I have something," he said simply. She didn't answer. Her jaw tightened. Then the boy whimpered, a thin, high sound. His arms trembled. Ray stepped back, returned 5 minutes later with a cloth bundle and a small tin. Inside, A thermometer, a jar of crushed willow bark, a cracked ceramic bowl. He knelt slowly, set the items down, looked at her. "I used this when mine had fever," he said, "before the doctors could get here." Still, she hesitated. Her hand gripped the boy's tighter. "I'm not asking for anything," Ray said, "just offering." The girl touched her mother's arm, not pulling, just grounding, and the mother, too tired, too scared, too alone, finally nodded. Ray worked without a word, dipped the cloth in cool water, wiped the boy's forehead gently, measured a pinch of bark into hot water from a thermos and waited. The boy whimpered again but didn't pull away. "She doesn't like help," the girl said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Ray glanced at her, not surprised. "Some people learn that early," he replied. "Some never unlearn it." The girl looked at her mother, then at her brother, then down. The woman didn't speak for a long while. She just watched as the fever cooled slowly, breath by breath. Eventually, the boy drifted into sleep, uneven but calmer. Ray stood, wiped his hands on his jeans. He looked at her once more. "Keep him warm, keep the cloth damp," he said, then turned to go. But before he reached the door, she asked, "What was her name?" Ray stopped. A beat, two, then without turning back, he said, "Marla. She was 7 the first time I had to do that." And then he was gone. Later that night, the shed was lit softly again. Inside, the boy lay between his mother and sister. The girl whispered something into his hair. The woman stared at the ceiling, eyes wide open, unmoving. In the quiet, she turned the name over in her mind. Marla. A name said without grief, without pride, just gently, like something still held. She didn't know why that mattered, but somehow it did. It happened on a Monday. Ray had gone into town. He didn't say why, and she didn't ask. Just saw him disappear down the gravel road in that old green pickup, leaving behind the faint echo of tires crunching stone. The house was quiet, the shed even quieter. The girl was drawing beside the porch. The boy still slept, his fever faded, but his dreams thick with something he couldn't yet explain, and the woman, her name was Elise. Stood in the yard, arms folded against the wind that had picked up since morning. Her eyes drifted toward the wood shop. She didn't plan to go in, but her feet started walking anyway. The door opened with a creak that surprised her. It sounded too human. She stepped inside and shut it gently behind her. The air held a warmth, not just from the sunlight, but from something slower-like. The room had been gathering silence for years, and had finally learned to wear it comfortably. Tools lined the wall, arranged with intention. No dust, no clutter, nothing out of place except for a thin layer of sawdust on the floor, almost artful in its scattering. She didn't touch anything, just walked slowly, passing her fingers near things without making contact. A half-finished drawer sat on the bench, neat dovetail joints. Someone had measured 3 times before cutting. On the shelf above it, a small tin labeled "Almost" held bent nails and half-sanded knobs. That made her pause. She looked around again. Then her eyes landed on the wall behind the old lathe. There, tucked just behind a coil of twine, was a photograph. A woman, not young but vibrant, stood barefoot in tall grass. One hand on her hip, the other holding a toolbox like it belonged to her. There was dirt on her knees and paint in her hair. She wasn't smiling exactly, but she wasn't afraid to be seen. Pinned beside it was a tiny piece of wood, a scrap no bigger than a postcard. On it, carved by hand, were 5 words: "Fixed what I could reach." The chisel marks weren't decorative. They were deep, uneven, as if made in anger or maybe in grief. Elise felt something tighten in her chest, not pain but pressure, like she had stumbled into the part of someone's story that wasn't meant to be read aloud. She turned to leave, but something else caught her eye near the window. A chair, Not like the others, this one was unfinished. The frame was solid, but one leg sat shorter than the rest. The wood was darker, older, the seat still bare. Someone had started this chair and never finished it. Or maybe they had finished exactly what they meant to. Elise stood there a moment longer, not thinking, just feeling. Then footsteps, gravel outside. She backed away quickly, quietly, not out of guilt, out of respect. By the time Ray opened the shop door, she was already standing near the porch, arms folded, watching the horizon. He didn't say anything. She didn't either. But when their eyes met, something subtle passed between them. Not confession. Recognition. That evening she brought him tea. 1 cup, no sugar. Placed it on the windowsill. Didn't wait for thanks. Just left it there. Warm. The way he had done for her, and later when he saw it sitting there half full, still warm, still quiet, he smiled. Barely. But he smiled. The boy hadn't spoken in 2 days. He wasn't mute, just cautious. The way some kids get when they've learned that quiet is safer than asking for anything. He followed his sister around like a shadow. Ate only when she ate. Slept curled against his mother, arms around her like she was the last safe island in a sea of moving. But that morning, something changed. Ray was in the kitchen, not cooking exactly, just standing over a glass pitcher of water, slicing lemons with the precision of a man used to making things fit. It was warm outside, unseasonably so. The kind of warmth that makes dust rise from the gravel and hang in the air like memory. He added 2 tablespoons of sugar, stirred slowly, tasted it. Too sharp. He added 1 more. The girl peeked into the screen door, hesitant. Ray waved her in. "Still warm out," he said. "Thought something cold might help." She nodded, then looked over her shoulder. The boy stood by the porch rail, clutching it with both hands. Ray poured 2 small glasses, handed 1 to the girl, left the second on the counter, didn't push it. He stepped back to the sink and busied himself with wiping a plate that was already clean. The girl took a sip, then smiled. A quick glance at Ray approval, then she walked outside, knelt beside her brother and handed him the second glass. Whispered something he didn't respond to. He stared at the drink, then back at her. She nodded, just once. He took the glass with both hands, brought it to his lips, sipped, and paused. His eyes squinted slightly, surprised by the taste maybe, or the cold, or the sugar. Then he laughed. Not a chuckle, not a polite sound. A real belly-deep laugh that bubbled up like it hadn't been allowed for far too long. The kind of laugh that makes your shoulders bounce. The kind that's contagious. The girl laughed too. Relief more than joy. Her hand covered her mouth, but her eyes were wide and bright. Their mother appeared in the doorway, hair pulled back, face lined with exhaustion. She looked at them, confused. Then followed the sound back to Ray in the kitchen. He wasn't smiling, but something about the way he leaned on the counter gave him away. The woman looked at the pitcher, then at the boy. "What was it?" she asked quietly. Ray didn't answer right away, just raised the wooden spoon in the pitcher slightly, let a drop fall back into the swirl. "Just lemon and sugar," he said, "nothing fancy." She nodded, looked out at her son again. He hasn't laughed like that in I don't know how long. Ray didn't turn around, just wiped the spoon clean. "Sometimes it's the simple things," he said. She stepped forward, poured a glass for herself, sipped, winced. "Still a little sharp," she said. He shrugged. "Can't fix everything." She looked at him sideways, then smiled not wide, but real. "Yeah," she said, "but this, it helps." They stood there a moment in the quiet, not awkward, just still. Then the door creaked as the children came back in, dragging laughter behind them like sunshine on their heels. The boy held the empty glass up toward Ray, arms out. "More?" he whispered. Ray took it without a word, refilled it. No hesitation this time. No flinch when the boy brushed his sleeve. And as the boy walked back to the porch, humming some made-up tune, Ray looked at the girl. "He's got good timing," he said. The girl tilted her head. "Why?" Ray picked up the sugar jar. "Because this was the last spoonful." The girl grinned. And somewhere in that small wooden house, where silence used to live in every room, something shifted. Not broken, just looser, like laughter had found the first crack in the wall. The bell above the hardware store door let out its usual tired chime. Ray stepped in, boots dusted with sawdust, hands marked with oil and glue. He moved quietly through the aisles, wood glue, screws, a new blade for the planer. Routine. Behind the counter, Vince looked up from his paper. 60-something, retired deputy, the kind of man who still noticed too much, even when pretending not to. "Morning, Ray." Ray gave a nod. "Vince." The same exchange every month, maybe longer. No small talk, just enough to keep the peace. Ray placed his items on the counter. Vince scanned them slowly, as if each had a story he hadn't heard yet. "You still working out by the creek?" he asked. Ray shrugged. "Same place?" Vince handed him the receipt, but didn't let go just yet. "Had a fella come through here yesterday," he said, almost like he wasn't sure why he was saying it. "Asking about a woman and 2 kids, said he was just passing through." Ray's grip tightened slightly. "Didn't catch a name?" "Nope," Vince said, still watching. "Didn't give one. Wore a clean jacket, though. Rental car parked crooked outside the diner. City man, probably. Said he was looking for his sister. Seemed real concerned, but not the kind that comes from love." Ray didn't answer. Vince finally let go of the receipt. "Just thought you'd want to know," he said. "Town's small. Ears work better than phones." Ray nodded once, pocketed the slip, and turned to leave. But before he reached the door, Vince added, "She's not the first to come through here with quiet eyes." Ray paused, glanced back. Vince folded his paper. "We don't always ask questions, doesn't mean we don't notice." Outside, the street was quiet. A dog barked somewhere behind the post office. The coffee shop had 3 cars out front, none of them rentals. Ray stood there for a moment, adjusting the bag in his hand. Then he walked back to the truck, slid behind the wheel, and started the engine with a low growl. Back at the house, the girl was painting on scrap wood little trees, stars, symbols she didn't explain. Elise was chopping vegetables on the porch, the boy playing with a toy Ray had carved for him from pine. 2 wheels, a body, no name. When Ray pulled in, no one looked up right away. That in itself told him something had changed. The silence wasn't about fear anymore. It was habit now, comfort. But still, he looked around carefully. No footprints. No tire tracks. No cigarette butts in the gravel. He exhaled through his nose, barely audible. Elise noticed, wiped her hands on her jeans. "What happened?" she asked. Ray shook his head. "Nothing yet." She looked at him for a long beat, then said without emotion, "But it's coming." Ray didn't deny it. Instead, he looked at the boy playing in the dirt and said, "We may need to talk about what you want." Elise didn't answer right away. She looked at her children, then at the horizon, then quietly, "What if I don't know yet?" Ray nodded. "That's fine, but don't wait too long. Some questions knock before they break in." She bit the inside of her cheek, looked down at her hands. The knife in her palm trembled slightly. Not from fear, from memory. Then she set it down, and for the first time since arriving, she said, "I don't want to run again." Ray looked at her, really looked. Then softly, "Good." Inside the shed, the oil lamp hadn't been lit yet, but Ray knew where it was, and tonight it wouldn't burn for safety. It would burn for warning. The knife moved slowly across the skin of the potato, curling a thin ribbon of peel onto the cutting board. Elise sat at the kitchen table, a dish towel folded under one elbow, a bowl of water on her right. The boy napped in the back room. The girl was sketching on the porch with a stick of charcoal. Ray leaned against the counter, hands in his pockets, watching the kettle warm on the stove. No one had spoken for a while, not because there was nothing to say, because something was building. She peeled another potato. The sound was soft blade against skin, water sloshing slightly as she dropped it in. Then she said it, quiet, even. I was 19 when I got married. Ray didn't move. Elise peeled another. We lived in Oklahoma, just outside Tulsa. Flat country, dry as bone. Still no reaction. She half smiled, not fondly, just from the muscle memory of telling a story that used to feel like someone else's. He didn't hit me. Not at first. That's what people always ask. The blade caught slightly on a soft spot in the skin. She adjusted, kept going. It started with the small things, checking receipts, moving my car keys, always needing to know where I was, what I was doing, who I spoke to. Ray set 2 mugs on the table, one near her, one near him. He didn't sit. He told me no one else would want a girl like me. Said I was lucky. She wiped her fingers, took a sip of water, not the tea. I believed him for a while, then I got pregnant, then again. Ray finally sat, quiet, elbows on the table, mug untouched. One night he got drunk, broke the lamp, not near me yet, but close enough the kids cried all night. That was when I knew. She looked up, met his eyes for the first time. I waited 6 months, saved cash from groceries, hid it in the cereal box. Ray blinked slowly. Elise went on, more to the room than to him now. I left while he was at work. Took the truck. The kids didn't even ask where we were going. Just climbed in like they'd been waiting for that moment their whole lives. She laughed short, dry, almost bitter. But I didn't have a plan, no family to go to, no friends left who'd still pick up the phone. We just drove. Ray tapped his thumb once on the rim of his cup. Elise looked at him again. I'm not telling you this because I want pity. He nodded. I know. I'm telling you so you don't waste your kindness in case, I don't know, in case it's a mistake. Ray picked up the other potato, took her spare knife, peeled slowly in silence. Elise waited, but he didn't offer advice, didn't give comfort. He just peeled alongside her, matched her rhythm. After a while, she said, That's the first time I told it out loud without shaking. He nodded again. It's a solid story. She smirked, caught off guard. Solid? He met her gaze, steady. You didn't leave out the hard parts. She looked down at the cutting board. Her hands were wet. She wiped them on her jeans. I didn't say his name. You don't have to. She paused, then asked, barely above a whisper, Do you think he's still looking for us? Ray didn't answer right away. He set the last peeled potato into the bowl. I think he might be, he said. But I also think you're not the same woman who left him. Elise looked up, something shifting in her chest. No, she said. I'm not. Ray stood, took the bowl to the sink, washed his hands. Behind him, Elise stared at the half-full mugs. I didn't come here to stay, she said. But I'm not running again. Not unless I have to. He turned back to her, eyes steady. Then you're not running, he said. Not tonight. The kettle hissed softly, the windows fogged slightly, and in the air between them something unspoken settled in. Not forgiveness, not trust, but the beginning of something that might one day become both. The rain had passed, leaving the yard glistening with the smell of wet pine and damp soil. Inside the shop, the air was dry and warm. A thin ray of sun reached through the high window, landing on the old wall clock above the tool shelf. Elise stood alone. Ray had gone back to the shed to fetch something. The kids were still napping. She had wandered in just to escape the wind, but now she stood still, eyes fixed on that clock. It was the only thing in the room that didn't work. The face was slightly yellowed, the glass cracked in one corner. The hands pointed to 4:17 permanently, stubbornly, as if refusing to acknowledge the passing of anything else. She stepped closer. The rest of the shop was humming with quiet life tools in order. Drawers freshly built, wood shavings on the floor like scattered petals, but the clock. It waited. A small brass key hung from a string below it. She reached up. Not quickly, not with purpose, just gently. Her fingers brushed the key, cold, real. She took it down and held it, feeling the weight. Then, on instinct, not understanding why, she opened the small panel on the side of the clock and fit the key inside. She turned it, slowly, just once. Nothing happened at first, then click, not a ring, not a chime. Just the softest, most delicate internal shift, like something old was clearing its throat. She stepped back. The second hand ticked once, then stopped again. But it had moved. Just that, one clean, small tick. Behind her, the door creaked. Ray stepped in carrying a folded tarp. He stopped when he saw where she stood. Her eyes didn't leave the clock. "It still works?" Ray nodded once. "A little. Not for long." "What happened to it?" He set the tarp down carefully. "Stopped ticking the day Marla died." She looked at him, not startled, just present. "You never fixed it?" "I didn't see the point." She turned back toward the clock. "I think it just needed someone else's hand." Ray didn't speak, but his jaw clenched. The second hand stayed still, but the sound lingered in the room, the memory of motion, the echo of effort. Elise set the key on the windowsill, beside the jar of bent nails. Ray walked over slowly, picked up the key. "Most people would have been afraid to touch it," he said. She shrugged. "Most people didn't come here with nothing left to break." He looked at her, really looked. And then, without speaking, he set the key back on its string and stepped aside. Elise took one more glance at the clock, then turned toward the door. As she reached for the handle, Ray said quietly, "Thank you." She paused, not because of what he said, but how he said it, like she'd done something sacred without knowing. She didn't reply, just nodded once, and left the room with that single tick still hanging in the air, like a secret only the two of them had heard. It started with a crate and a bent nail. The girl Lena had found a flat board in the corner of the shop, sanded smooth but never used. She carried it out like treasure, dragging it across the dirt until Ray came out, saw the streak it left, and simply asked, "Need help?" By noon, the crate had legs, 4 uneven ones, but it stood. That afternoon, 2 wooden animals appeared, a stubby fox and something that looked like a goat, if goats had square ears and too many toes. The boy, Jonah, placed them carefully on the crate, sat beside them with his legs crossed and his eyes proed. The next morning, Ray added a little sign. Handmade. No price. Just the word. By day 3, there were 7 figures, 1 tiny boat and a crooked tray with painted flowers that only bloomed on one side. Someone from the post office walked by and left a peppermint. Someone from the diner left a note on napkin. "You've got a good eye, kid." Elise watched from the porch, arms folded, expression unreadable. "Why not sell them?" she asked Ray that evening. He was working a soft cloth over a piece of walnut. "Because they're not for selling. They're for saying." "Saying what?" "That they were here, that they made something, that it mattered." Elise didn't respond, but she looked at the little table the next morning longer than she meant to. On the 4th day, someone left a tin of colored pencils. No note, just wrapped in brown paper. The girl used every one. By the end of the week, folks in town had begun to talk. "Those kids belong to Ray?" "No, just staying out there, I heard." "With who?" "Some woman. Quiet. Doesn't come in much. Ray's never had kids, though." "Maybe not, but I saw him teaching the little one to carve." In the cafe, in the hardware store, in the dusty corners of routine where nothing ever really changed, their names hadn't come up in years. Now they did. Not loud, not cruel, just curious. Vince heard the talk, sipped his coffee slower, didn't add fuel, didn't douse it either. He passed by the house one morning slower than usual, saw the girl adjust the tray on the table, brushing off a pine needle like it mattered. It did. He kept driving, but not fast. That night, the boy ran inside, breathless. "There's money!" he shouted, waving a crumpled $5 bill. Elise looked up from the stove. "What?" "In the jar. Someone put money." She stepped outside. Sure enough, the old mason jar next to the sign now held 2 crumpled bills and some change. Ray appeared from the shop, wiping his hands. She pointed. "We didn't set a price." He nodded. "They gave what they thought it was worth." Jonah jumped in place. "We can buy cookies." Lena shook her head. "Or nails, better nails." Ray laughed, soft but real. "Sounds like a partnership." Elise watched the kids argue over cookies versus tools, then looked at Ray. "You knew this would happen?" He shrugged. "Didn't know. Just hoped." She glanced back at the road. "I think they're starting to like us," she said. Ray didn't look away from the kids. Let them. That evening, when the porch light clicked on, it didn't feel like protection anymore. It felt like invitation. And across the town, where shadows lengthened and gossip turned slow, a few people sat quietly and wondered if maybe, just maybe, something good was finally starting again. It was late afternoon when they found it. A plain white envelope. No name, no stamp, just there, waiting on the bottom step of the porch. The wind hadn't knocked it off. The rain hadn't touched it. Someone had placed it there carefully, like a hand on a shoulder you didn't ask for. Lena was the first to see it. She froze halfway through carrying a bowl of water to the crate where the carved foxes had now multiplied. "Mom!" she called out, her voice tight. Elise stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on a towel. Her eyes followed her daughter's finger, then locked on the envelope. She didn't move. Not right away. Ray was still in the shop, Jonah napping inside. The world felt paused, like even the birds were waiting to see what she'd do. Elise stepped forward, picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. No return address, just sealed. She turned it once, twice, held it up to the light. Nothing showed through. Then Ray appeared, saw the way she held it. His steps slowed. His face didn't change, but his hands curled just slightly, like they remembered something his heart had tried to forget. "Found it just now," Elise said. Her voice wasn't trembling. Yet. He nodded. Said nothing. "Wasn't here an hour ago." Again, he nodded. Lena looked between them. Who would leave a letter without anything on it? Neither of them answered. Ray reached out. "May I?" Elise handed it to him. He turned it over, ran a thumb along the edge. He didn't open it either. Then in a voice low and even, "If he's this close, we don't have days, maybe not even hours." Elise crossed her arms. "He's not supposed to know where we are." Ray looked up. "He doesn't need to know. He only needs to make you afraid." Lena's eyes widened. "Is he coming?" Elise crouched beside her, placed both hands on her daughter's shoulders. "You're safe. Do you hear me?" But the girl wasn't asking for comfort. She was asking for a plan. And right now, no one had one. Ray tucked the envelope inside his jacket pocket. "We don't open it. Not yet." Elise looked at him. "Why?" Because whatever's inside is meant to shake you. If we don't read it, it can't do that, not today. She stared at the pocket, tempted, so tempted. But she nodded. Okay. Jonah came outside then, rubbing his eyes. What's happening? Lena turned quickly. Nothing, just wind. Jonah blinked. You always lie when you say just. Ray chuckled, only barely. Smart kid. That evening, Ray sat on the porch alone. The sun had dropped behind the trees, casting the field in a long, golden sigh. He held the envelope in his hand, still unopened. Inside could be anything, a threat, a memory, a photograph, or just an empty page, but it didn't matter. It had been placed there for effect, to make them feel watched, to remind her she was still hunted. It had worked, but not completely. He heard the door creak behind him. Elise stepped out, holding 2 mugs. She sat beside him without speaking, handed him one. Steam rose between them. He didn't sign it, did he? She asked. Ray shook his head. Didn't need to. A long silence passed. Then Elise said, The thing about men like him, they don't actually want you back. They just don't want to believe you left. Ray looked out over the yard. Then let's make sure he knows you did. They didn't talk more that night, but the envelope stayed on the table between them, silent, sealed, powerless, at least for now. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes after a long day of pretending nothing's wrong. Jonah was asleep, curled into a tangle of blanket and stuffed fox. Lena lay facing the wall, eyes open, tracing lines in the wood with her thumb. Elise sat at the kitchen table, chin in her palm, staring at a half-cold cup of tea. Ray was in the shop, or at least that's where he always went when things got too close. The porch light buzzed. A moth tapped against the screen. Somewhere in the woods, an owl gave a low, thoughtful call. And inside the shop, the old clock sat in its usual place, high on the back wall, shadowed by years, untouched since the last time Elise wound it. 4:17. Same as ever, until it wasn't. It began with a sound so small, it didn't belong in the world of waking. Tick, just one, like a heartbeat from a ghost, then 10 seconds later. Tick. The minute hand shifted. No fanfare, no creak of old gears, just the slow, deliberate surrender of stillness. The second hand began to sweep, not smoothly, no. It hesitated, staggered slightly as though unsure of its own right to move. Then moment by moment it steadied. In the main house, Elise rose from her seat, not quickly, not even aware of why. She walked to the door and stepped outside, arms wrapped tight against the cold that had nothing to do with wind. She didn't mean to go to the shop, but her feet turned that way. Her body remembered. Inside, the room was dark but not silent. The rhythm greeted her the moment she entered. Tick, tick, tick. Her eyes rose to the clock. It was alive again. No one had touched it. She knew this. Ray hadn't gone near it in weeks. The keys still hung from the same string, but the hands were moving. 4:28. 4:29. She stared, breath caught, not from fear, from something deeper, something like reverence. Ray stepped in behind her. He didn't ask why she was there. He heard it too. He looked at the clock, looked at her. Then he whispered, almost like an apology, I didn't touch it. She nodded, I know. They both stood still. Outside, the trees creaked. The stars blinked behind clouds. Inside, time marched forward, soft, quiet, certain. The past hadn't been erased, but the future had just opened a door. Ray walked to the bench, sat down. Elise followed, sat across from him. He didn't speak, neither did she. But between them, the ticking filled the air, not heavy, not loud, just enough to remind them. Something that had once stopped could start again. And sometimes that was the bravest thing of all. It was just after 3 a.m. when the fire started. a faint orange glow over the hill, where the trees grew thicker and the wind always smelled like old bark and mildew. By the time Ray woke, the smell had already reached the porch. He stood in his boots, staring out across the dark, trying to place it. Not fireplace smoke, not a neighbor burning trash. This was wood and wire, the scent of something not meant to burn. He grabbed a flashlight, headed down the trail. Elise followed half a minute later, wrapping a coat over her shoulders, lips pressed into a flat line. The kids stayed sleeping, unaware of the shift in air. At the bend near the blackberry bushes, Ray stopped. The glow was clearer now. An old house abandoned years ago, boards sagging, windows long gone, was burning. Not fully. Not a roaring fire, but intentional. Someone had started it just enough. A car might have passed, unseen, a lighter, a rag. That was all it would take. He stood still, watching the flames dance up the side wall. Elise said nothing, but the way her arms wrapped tighter around her chest spoke volumes. Ray finally murmured, "Someone wanted us to see it." She nodded. "It's a message. Not from the town, not from weather, from him." By morning, the fire had died, leaving only a blackened shell and a haze that clung to everything like a warning. Vince came by in his old truck parked near the gravel drive, didn't get out right away, just sat there a minute, thinking. Ray met him halfway. They didn't shake hands. They never did. "Anyone hurt?" Ray asked. Vince shook his head. "Place was empty. Has been for years. No squatters, no power." Ray looked out toward the charred remains. "Then it wasn't an accident." "No," Vince agreed, "but no one saw who did it." A long silence stretched. Then Vince added, "You ever burn anything on purpose, Ray?" Ray looked him in the eye. "Not lately." Vince nodded. "Didn't think so." He hesitated, then said softer, "You'd tell me if you were in trouble?" Ray didn't smile. "We're not in trouble. We're being watched." Vince exhaled slowly. "Well, that's worse." They stood in silence a beat longer, both men staring at the smoke curling in the cold air. Then Vince climbed back into his truck, drove off without a word more. That afternoon, Elise cleaned the porch, swept harder than usual, checked the windows twice. The kids were quieter, not scared, just reading the room. The girl asked once, "Why does smoke make people look so serious?" Elise replied, "Because it means something's already gone, and we didn't stop it." Later, Ray brought out the fox Jonah had carved. It was singed at the base, fell too close to the lantern the boy had been playing with days earlier. They fixed it together, not perfectly, but enough. At dusk, the wind shifted. Smoke moved east toward the highway, but something in the air still clung to them. Not danger, not yet, just a sense that the next thing wouldn't wait long. The sun had just dipped behind the trees, throwing long orange slants of light across the yard. Jonah sat cross-legged by the porch, playing with his wooden boat, the one he and Ray had carved together 2 weeks ago. The sail was crooked, but he liked it that way. He pushed it along the dirt, making ocean sounds with his mouth, lost in his own quiet world. Then the wheel came loose. Just a little at first, a wobble. Then a crack, sharp and quick. The left side of the hull split where the grain had always been weak. The boy froze. He picked it up gently, like it might shatter more if he moved too fast. Then he did what children do when they're not sure what to feel. He started to cry. Not loudly, just that small, trembling kind of cry that comes from somewhere deeper than pain. Elise was on the porch, folding laundry. She dropped the towel in her hands and rushed over. "What happened?" Jonah held the broken toy out, already shaking his head. "I didn't mean to. I wasn't being rough. It just broke." She knelt beside him, wiping his cheek with her sleeve. "It's okay, baby, it's okay." But he wasn't looking at her. He was looking past her toward the shed, toward Ray. Ray had seen the whole thing. He didn't move right away, just dried his hands on a rag, then walked slowly over to where they were. Kneeling down, he reached out his hand. "Can I see it?" Jonah sniffled, handed it over, unsure. Ray turned the broken piece in his palm, studied the split, the way the fibers gave in to pressure, then nodded. "Old crack. It was gonna give sooner or later." The boy's eyes widened. "I didn't break it on purpose." Ray looked at him calmly. "I know." He stood. "Come on, let's fix it." In the shop, Ray placed the pieces on the workbench, turned on the small lamp. Jonah stood on a stool beside him, cheeks still wet, hands clasped. Elise stayed by the door, arms folded, watching quietly. Ray didn't talk much. He sanded the edges gently, brushing off the splinters. Applied a thin line of glue. Held it steady. Jonah watched every move. After a few minutes, Ray pressed the pieces together and wrapped a clamp around the joint. "It has to sit overnight," he said. Jonah frowned. "So I can't play with it?" Ray smiled, just barely. "Good things take time." The boy nodded. But then Ray added something else. Quiet. Not to the boy, not entirely. "To fix something, it has to be seen, touched. You can't mend what stays hidden." Jonah didn't understand. Not all the way. But Elise did. She looked at Ray. And he didn't look back. Just wiped the glue from his fingers and set the boat carefully on the shelf. Later that night, Jonah slept soundly. The toy sat drying under the lamp. Elise stood in the doorway of the shed, arms still crossed. Ray sat at the bench, sanding another piece. "I was always the one who fixed things in our old house," she said. "Light switches, leaky taps, scraped knees." Ray didn't look up. "And who fixed you?" She laughed once. Not loud, not joyful. "Nobody. I wasn't the one allowed to break." Ray looked at her then. "You are now." A long pause. Then Elise stepped forward, laid her hand on the workbench. "Do you ever think people get like wood? If the crack's too deep, it's better to start over?" Ray shook his head slowly. "Nah. You just have to be there. Somebody has to be there when it breaks. That's the only way you know where to fix it." He didn't say, "I'll be that person." He didn't need to. Elise didn't say thank you. She didn't need to either. The silence between them had already said it. The morning after, sunlight poured into the shop in soft angles. Dust floated lazily, catching gold in the beams. Ray stood at the workbench, the toy boat fully dried. He ran a finger across the seam, clean, solid, barely visible now. Jonah hadn't woken yet. The house was quiet. Elise sat on the porch with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. Ray set the boat aside. On the far wall of the shop, above the clamps and chisels, was a narrow shelf, rough, unvarnished, easy to miss unless you knew it was there. It held odd scraps, a split drawer face, a chair leg with a knot too deep to use, a handle from a cabinet long dismantled. To anyone else, it looked like junk, but to Ray it was a kind of map, a memory of what had broken, and might still matter. He took the small offcut Jonah had cracked the day before, just a thin wedge that had snapped under pressure, and ran a hand along its edge. It didn't match anything. Not yet, but it wasn't trash. He climbed up slow and steady and placed it gently on the shelf, next to the drawer face, between the warped spindle and the box of mismatched screws. Then he stepped back, hands on his hips, and just looked. It wasn't sentiment, it wasn't hoarding, it was waiting. Every piece up there had one thing in common. It wasn't ready to be used, but it wasn't ready to be gone. Elise stepped inside, unnoticed at first. She saw him looking at the shelf, then glanced up. "I always wondered why you kept those," she said. Ray glanced over. "Some pieces don't know what they're for yet." She walked closer, touched the newest edition lightly. "This one was Jonah's?" He nodded. "It snapped easy. Bad grain, too dry." "But you didn't throw it out." He shrugged. "It's still good wood." Elise was quiet for a moment. Her fingers grazed a cracked spindle. It wobbled slightly under her touch. "I used to throw out everything that didn't work, people too." Ray didn't answer, but he listened. She went on. "It felt easier than fixing, safer maybe, less proof that I'd made bad choices." Ray took a breath. "And now?" She looked at the shelf, at the strange little museum of second chances. "Now I think maybe I was wrong." A long silence settled between them, but not uncomfortable. Then Ray pointed at a small drawer, front marked with 3 notches. "That one sat there for 6 years, he said. "Didn't fit anything. Didn't match any wood grain I had." "What changed?" "I needed a spacer for a rocking chair leg last month. None of the fresh stock would bend right. That piece," he pointed, "fit like it was born for it." Elise smiled just faintly. "So now you believe in destiny?" He shook his head. "I believe in keeping things that aren't done yet." She looked at him, and for a moment she wasn't a woman on the run. She wasn't a mother bracing for what might come. She was just a piece of something. Still solid. Still useful. Just not finished. Ray picked up the boat. "Jonah'll be proud." She nodded. "He was proud even when it was broken." Ray smiled. "Good. That means he'll know it's okay to break again." They stood there in the soft light, 2 people who'd seen enough of life to stop expecting perfection. Above them on the shelf, the mended wood sat quietly waiting. Not for forgiveness, not even for purpose, just for the day someone might look at it and say, "I know where you go now." The envelope came by certified mail. It didn't arrive like a threat. It came in a manila sleeve with typed labels and a small red stamp in the corner that read, "Urgent, signature required." Ray signed for it at the general store, thanked the clerk, and walked out slowly, already knowing it wasn't good. By the time he got home, Elise was sweeping the porch. Jonah was drawing shapes in the dust with a stick. Lena read a book upside down on the steps just for the thrill of being contrary. Ray didn't say a word, just handed her the envelope. Her fingers went cold before she even touched it. She read the label, the name of the sender, Dale H. Barker, attorney at law. No mistaking it, her ex-husband's lawyer. She stood frozen for a second, then walked inside without a word, sat at the table and opened the seal. Ray stayed on the porch, giving her space, giving her dignity. But the moment she saw the words "petition for custody inquiry" and "removal from state lines without consent," her breath turned jagged. It was all there. Her leaving. The kids. No formal protection order, no police report, just a disappearance. And now it would be used against her. The letter didn't accuse her of abuse. It didn't need to. It accused her of vanishing. In legal terms, that was enough to paint her unfit. She folded the letter carefully, even though her hands were shaking. She placed it back in the envelope and carried it outside like something fragile. Ray looked at her, reading her face before he read her words. "It's real," she said. He took the envelope, scanned the document, didn't flinch, didn't sigh, just asked, "What do you want to do?" Elise looked past him toward the yard, where Jonah had abandoned his stick and was now picking dandelions like they were gold. "I can't stay here," she whispered. "They'll come, with paperwork, with police." Ray didn't argue. That's what made it harder. because some part of her wanted him to fight back, to say stay, to say we'll figure it out, but he didn't. He gave her the only thing she'd never had before, choice. She sat on the step beside him, her shoulders curled in, the envelope between them like a loaded gun no one had fired yet. "I don't want to lose them," she said. "You haven't." "I might." Ray paused. "Running again won't change that. It'll just mean they never learn to stay." She closed her eyes. The truth of it burned worse than the letter. "I'm tired, Ray." "I know. I don't know what kind of mother I am anymore." He looked at her then, firm, steady. "The kind who's still here." She said nothing. Jonah ran up just then, holding out a fistful of crushed flowers. "These are for your hair," he said. Elise managed to smile. "Thank you, baby." He leaned against her shoulder, content, no idea of the war raging in her chest. Ray reached over, took the envelope again, and folded it once more. "Whatever we do," he said, we don't do it alone." She didn't nod, not yet, but she didn't run either. And that was something. Ray never asked for help, not because he was proud, though he was, but because asking meant saying out loud what you feared. And sometimes fear was easier left unnamed, but this time was different. He walked into Vince's shop just after lunch. The bell above the door rang with its usual soft jingle. Vince didn't look up from the fishing rod he was restringing. "You hungry or just out of nails?" "Neither," Ray said. "I need someone to tell the truth." Vince didn't blink, just said, "About what?" Ray set the envelope on the counter, the one from the lawyer, the one Elise had folded too many times. Vince read the label, then opened it, slow, silent. After a minute, he set it down, wiped his hands with a rag that already looked too clean. "She's the one from the old Barker house, isn't she?" Ray nodded. "Good with her hands," Vince added. "And the kid's quiet, respectful." Ray didn't say a word. Vince nodded again. "You'll get your letter," then added like it wasn't even a question. "Want me to call Lorna at the post office?" Ray let out a long breath. "If she's willing. She'll be the first in line." The next morning, a folded paper appeared on Ray's porch. No envelope, just a single sheet pressed flat with careful hands. Elise opened it, read the first line. "To whom it may concern, I've seen that woman carry groceries for a neighbor who never asked. I've seen her wait 10 minutes for a cat to cross the road. That's not nothing." No name signed, no return address. Later that day, another appeared. This one from a man Elise didn't recognize by name but had once handed an extra cup of coffee to at the diner. "We don't know much about her past, but we know what she is now. Steady. The kids are safe, that's enough." Ray never said who asked. She never asked who wrote. They just kept coming. By the end of the week, there were 7. Handwritten, typed, some with shaky cursive, some in all caps, all from people who had watched her sweep a porch, bandage a knee, stand quietly while gossip tried to decide what box to put her in. People who had seen her live and had chosen to remember that. On Friday, Lena handed Elise a sheet of paper she'd written herself. In careful, blocky handwriting, it read, "My mom is brave. She reads stories even when she's tired. She lets us paint even when it's messy. She says sorry when she's wrong. That's what I want to grow up like." Elise sat down on the porch and cried for the first time in weeks. Not because she was afraid, because for once she didn't feel alone. Vince drove up the gravel road Saturday afternoon, stepped out without a word, handed Ray an envelope. "This one's from Lorna," he said, "in the mayor's office, and old man Harlan. Don't ask me how they all ended up on the same paper, but they did." Ray took it, nodded. Vince added, quieter this time, "We ain't lawyers, we ain't saints, but we've seen a good woman before." Ray looked him in the eye. "Thank you." Vince shrugged. You're the one who fixed my truck that winter without charging. Guess it's coming back around. Then he tipped his hat, got in the truck, and drove off. That night, Elise stood in the doorway with a stack of papers in her hand. "They don't owe me this," she said. Ray looked at her, calm and clear. "They don't do it because they owe you. They do it because they saw you." She opened her mouth, but no words came. Just tears, and for once she let them fall. Far above the porch, the night wind stirred the trees, and in the quiet kitchen, Jonah sat with his little fox figurine in one hand, whispering to it, "They're gonna say yes. I just know it." He didn't know who they were, but deep down, he believed somewhere, somehow, kindness was finally writing back. The old chapel hadn't held a sermon in nearly a decade. Its pews sagged from years of dust. The stained glass windows were faded, cracked in corners. Ivy crept in through the west wall. The altar stood empty, save for a crooked candle someone had lit just to prove it still could be done. That night, people gathered, not for prayer, not for judgment, but because they needed to look each other in the eye. Vince was there. So was Lorna from the post office. Old man Harlan, who hadn't stood for anything in years, sat in the back with his hat in his hands. Ray stood by the doorway, arms crossed, jaw set. The kids sat on either side of Elise, their legs swinging silently from a pew. No one had called it a meeting, but somehow they had all come. Elise stood when the room fell quiet. No microphone, no gavel, just her voice. "I know why you're here," she said. She didn't sound strong, but she sounded true. "I left a man I shouldn't have married. I took 2 children and disappeared. I didn't do it through courts. I didn't do it with paperwork. I did it because I was scared and I didn't have time to explain why." She looked down at her hands, then back up. "I don't regret leaving, but I never expected this, the porch light, the letters, the fact that anyone would care enough to sit in a room like this." A pause, a breath. "I didn't come here to build a new life. I came here to hide." Another pause. "But now I don't want to hide anymore." A voice broke the silence. Lorna's. "Then don't." Elise blinked. Vince cleared his throat. "You belong here more than some of the folks who've been here their whole lives." Someone else added, maybe Harlan, maybe not. "She brought something back to that house that ain't been there since Ray stopped laughing." Light laughter spread, quick, real, then quiet again. One woman in the back, Jane, who ran the diner, asked softly, "Do you want to stay, Elise?" No more speeches, no more explaining, just that. Elise looked at the kids. Jonah nodded without hesitation. Lena grabbed her mother's hand. Elise looked to Ray. He didn't nod, he didn't speak, but he was standing beside her and not moving. She turned back to the room. "Yes," she said, "I do." The candle on the altar flickered. Someone in the back exhaled, loud and long-like. They'd been holding their breath for weeks. Vince stepped forward, held up a folded letter. "We send this to the court," he said. "Not as law, just as witness." He looked at her. "You're not alone anymore." Elise took the letter. Her hands no longer shook. She said only, "Thank you." No applause, no ceremony, just a quiet nod from every head in the room. That was enough. Later that night, Elise and Ray stood outside the chapel. The moon hung low, soft and wide like a promise. "They didn't have to come," Elise said. Ray replied, "They didn't come for you. Not just for you. They came because sometimes people want a reason to do the right thing." She smiled, tired and bright. "And we gave them one?" Ray looked toward the house in the distance, its porch light glowing faintly through the trees. "You gave them hope," he said. Elise didn't answer, but she stood taller, and for the first time in a very long while, she believed it might be safe to stay. It had been a year. No countdown, no celebration, just a quiet passing of days until one morning, Elise looked up from her coffee and realized, "We're still here." The porch was painted now soft gray, chosen by Lena after 3 test samples. The cracks in the siding had been filled. The weeds in the yard gave way to raised beds of herbs and wildflowers. Jonah insisted on watering them at sunrise even when it rained. Inside, the kitchen smelled like warm bread, the kind Ray learned to bake without measuring. He claimed he still didn't know what he was doing. No one believed him. There was a new table in the dining room. It was oak, heavy and wide enough for 6. 6 chairs stood around it, each slightly different. One high-backed with carved stars, one small with a painted fox on the backrest, one that creaked when you leaned too far left. It hadn't always been 6. For a while there were just 3, then 4. No one said anything the day Elise brought home the 5th and 6th from the flea market. She just set them down and ran her hand over the wood. Ray saw it, didn't speak, just nodded once, quiet and sure. That night they all ate at the table. No guests, no need, but 6 seats just in case. The shed still stood strong at the edge of the trees, tools in their proper places, shavings on the floor, a rhythm in the air that made even silence feel like part of the work. Ray had a new piece on the bench, something tall, curved, half-formed. He wouldn't say what it was, said it would tell him when it was ready. Some nights Jonah came in just to sit, not to help, just to listen to the sound of the wood being shaped. Some nights Ray wasn't in there at all, but the light still turned on at dusk, not by switch, not by motion, just always on. No one could explain it. They stopped trying to. Some things don't need explanation to be real. On the front porch, Elise sat with a book open and unread in her lap. Lena painted her toenails. Jonah counted crickets. A breeze moved through the wind chimes low and slow. "Do you think people can tell?" Lena asked suddenly. Elise looked over. "Tell what?" "That this house used to be sad." Elise smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was true. "I think they'll know," she said, "but I don't think they'll mind." Jonah chimed in. "Sad things can still be good, that's what Ray says." Elise looked out at the field, the light slipping soft across the horizon. "He's right," she said, "and good things don't always start happy." Lena leaned against her shoulder. "I'm glad we stayed." Elise didn't answer, but her hand reached out gently and brushed a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. A gesture of belonging, of here and not anywhere else. Inside, on the shelf above the stove, sat the repaired boat, and next to it, a small wooden plaque. It read simply, "Fix what's worth fixing. Leave the light on." No signature, no date. But everyone in the house knew exactly who it came from, and why it mattered. The table was set for 6. It was a small thing, barely worth notice. But Ray had laid out the silverware himself that evening without measuring, without overthinking. Just set them down one by one until every plate had its place. Elise pulled the bread from the oven. Steam curled up like a gentle exhale. Lena made the salad too sour, and Jonah spilled water twice before settling down, knees swinging under the oak table. Ray brought the stew. Said nothing about the recipe, but the kids declared it tastes like camping, but better. No one corrected them. It was the first time they'd all sat down together at the table without a reason. No guest, no news, no tension hanging in the corners, just dinner. The kind that wraps itself around a room like a warm coat. Halfway through the meal, the clock above the shelf ticked loud. Too loud for such a quiet moment. Then, ding, 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 6 chimes, clean, steady, perfectly timed. No one spoke. Lena glanced up. Jonah froze, spoon in midair. Elise looked at Ray. Ray didn't look at the clock. He didn't need to. The last time it had struck 6 like that, it was the night his wife died. Dinner had gone cold that evening. He hadn't touched a fork since. That clock had sat frozen for months. Even after it ticked again, it never struck on the hour. Something always off. Something always broken. Until now. He didn't mention it. But his hand rested briefly on the edge of the table, just enough for Elise to notice the tremor. Jonah broke the silence. "Is it supposed to do that?" Ray cleared his throat. "Yes," Lena asked. "How'd it know?" No one answered. But Elise reached across the table and took one of the fresh rolls, broke it in half, and passed the larger piece to Ray. It was an old gesture, small, gentle, familiar. His eyes flicked up, just for a second. He nodded. Jonah resumed eating like nothing had happened, but the room had changed. Some invisible line had been crossed. Not a boundary, a bridge. Later that night, Ray stood alone in the shop. The dinner dishes were washed. The kids had gone to bed. Elise read on the porch light casting a soft halo behind her. Ray looked up at the clock once more. The hands read 7:43. Still ticking, still steady. He set his tools down, rubbed his palms together and turned off the lamp. But he left the door ajar, so that the sound of the clock's soft faithful could drift back to the house. Just enough to remind them all. Time had returned, not to haunt, but to stay. The morning was quiet, not the kind of silence that waits for something bad, the kind that means nothing is broken, at least not today. Elise stood in the workshop alone. Dust hung in the sunlight like gold flakes. Outside, the wind stirred the pine trees. The kids were at school. Ray had gone into town for hinges and flour. On the bench lay the chair, the one they'd been building slowly over months. Not for a customer, not for a purpose, just because some things take shape when you give them time. 4 legs, back curved like a question, seat made of overlapping boards that didn't match but worked. Only one gap left, a thin wedge along the back support, barely visible, but enough to feel unfinished. Elise turned to the shelf, the one above the bench, the one Ray never explained but never stopped adding to. And there it was, Jonah's broken piece, still smooth from sanding, still warm with memory. She reached for it, held it in her palm like something fragile. Then, without hesitation, fitted into the gap. It slid in perfectly. No force, no adjustment. Like it had waited all this time for the exact moment it would make sense. She sat in the chair. It didn't creak, it simply held. That afternoon, Elise brought the kids home early. Jonah had something in his pocket. Lena kept looking at the clouds like they were spelling something secret. Ray stepped out of the truck with a small wooden board tucked under his arm. He handed it to Elise without a word. The surface was smooth, the edges rounded. In the center were 3 words carved deep. Fixing time. Together. She ran her fingers over them, then met his eyes. "Want to help me hang it?" Ray nodded. "Where?" Elise smiled. "The gate." The 4 of them stood at the edge of the property. The old fence had been patched. The gate still leaned a little, but it worked. Jonah handed her the small nails. Ray held the board. Lena gave the final tap with the hammer. The sign went up, crooked by half a degree, perfectly so. That evening, dinner was calm. Simple food, simple talk. No one mentioned the past. No one needed to. Jonah asked for seconds. Lena showed off a drawing from school. Ray made a joke no one quite understood, but everyone laughed anyway. Elise looked around the table. 6 chairs, all filled. She didn't say it out loud, but inside something whispered, "We made it." As night settled, Elise stood by the window. Outside, the porch light glowed. In the shed, the lamp above the workbench still burned, even though no one was there. The clock ticked softly, not as a reminder of time lost, but as proof of time earned. She turned to see Jonah on the couch, half asleep. The little fox still clutched in one hand. "Ready for bed, love?" she asked. He nodded, eyes barely open. She scooped him up, his head against her shoulder. As she carried him down the hall, he murmured through the haze of sleep, "Is the clock still going?" She kissed his hair. "It is." He didn't ask anything else. He didn't need to. Because some part of him knew. As long as that clock ticks, as long as that light glows, they're still here. Whole, together, fixed, not flawless, but strong where they were once broken. She laid him down gently, pulled the blanket to his chin, his eyes closed, breath evened. Elise turned off the hallway light, left the door cracked just enough. Back in the workshop, the chair sat finished, the final piece still warm to the touch. And outside, beneath the crooked sign, the wind carried 4 names across the trees, not carved, not claimed, but held in the wood and in the light and in the silence that followed after.